Wonderful. Okay, well, let's get started. My name is Jordan Ashwood, and I am the Partnerships Manager at CGIU. And I'm really excited to be joined today by my colleague, Kara, from the VentureWell team, who's going to share a little bit more about how to really take a social innovation project and scale it so that it has a really strong and effective impact. So she's going to be speaking about different types of innovation pathways today. And so I will pass it over to her to kick us off.
Thanks, Jordan. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to spend the next bit of time with you all today. I'm Kara Barnes, a Senior Program Officer at VentureWell, and we're the accelerator training partner for the Verizon Forward for Good Challenge. We're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about pathways and methods to scale your social innovation and to really help you move from idea to ultimate social impact. Next slide, please. So VentureWell, as I said, is the accelerator partner in the Verizon Forward for Good Challenge. And we are a 26-year-old nonprofit that's headquartered in Western Massachusetts, but we have a nationally distributed staff footprint and a global network of partners. We're on a mission to cultivate a pipeline of inventors, innovators, and entrepreneurs that are driven to solve some of the world's biggest challenges. So we do this by supporting individuals, the teams and ventures they go on to create, and the ecosystem that supports and fosters their success. The E-Team Grant Program is our flagship program, but we also provide early stage innovator support, both nationally and globally, through a wide variety of other programs. And we're really pleased to be partnering with Verizon, CGIU, and HBCU FI for the Forward for Good Challenge. So next slide, please. So today we're going to spend a little time talking about different pathways, different methods to scale your social innovation and to move from idea to impact. But in order to do that, we first need to start with why. So, in explaining your social innovation to somebody else, you can probably easily explain the what that you are doing, and maybe even pretty easily explain the how you do it. But really the heart of the matter is the why. Why are you doing what you're doing? That should be the place that you start and the place that you're most familiar and comfortable with. The why gets at the root cause of your business, the root cause of the problem that you're trying to solve, the bigger problem, if you will. That why is your purpose. It's your cause. It's what you believe in. It's why you're doing what you're doing, and it's what inspires you and others to take action and change behavior. So people make a decision, they change their behavior based on the why rather than on the what or the how. So next slide, please. So here are a few examples to explain the why. So you'll see here on the left, Alex is developing a smartphone-based colorimeter, spectrophotometer, and microscope. That's the what he is doing. But the why is so that he can provide under-resourced high school teachers with tools that they need to provide STEM education. Another example is Maria, who is developing acoustic sensors and an algorithm for monitoring lung function and predicting respiratory attacks. Again, that's the what she is doing. But the why she is doing it is so that lung disease patients and their care providers can be provided with early alerts. That's the so what, why it matters. The final example is Brittany, who is developing a solar-powered atmospheric water generator. Again, the what, in order to provide clean drinking water to communities that lack reliable infrastructure. The why. So for all three of these examples, you can see that the why is the compelling reason that you should care or be interested in what they're doing. It doesn't matter that there might be a cool technology behind it. But really what matters is that they're solving a complex problem that has an emotional and an inspiring why. So next slide, please. So your why can help you stay grounded on your path to scale. If you keep that why as the center and the focus of what you're doing, kind of your North Star, if you will, that will guide you through the challenges and the hurdles and help you figure out how to scale your innovation from an idea all the way up to scale to ultimately having that social impact that you're aiming to achieve. Next slide, please. So what does scale look like? It can look a lot of different ways, depending on what your innovation is, depending on your individual goals and motivations. So there are three common pathways, I would say, that innovators often take to get their innovation to scale and ultimately achieve impact. But these are by no means the only ways. These are just kind of three of the most common ones that we see working most frequently. The first pathway is to create a startup venture, to create a new venture. And startups fall into three categories. There's fast growth, slow growth, and nonprofits. So fast growth startups are the kinds that you usually hear a lot about when you think about a startup. They have a large market, they require large investment to scale up quickly. The founders are willing to give up a lot of control to investors in order to achieve that scale quickly. And because the market is large for their innovation, the possibility for significant profit and therefore return on investment is attractive to investors. Slow growth or more organic growth startups often have a smaller market, a unique niche market, and they're, by default, are less attractive to investors who are seeking significant returns. However, the upside of these slow growth organic startups are that the founder keeps more control of the vision, and they have money from savings or friends and family or grants to get started. And so the founders have more ownership over the company than the fast growth startups who sell part of their company to investors to get that funding. And then the final type of startup venture are nonprofits, which can also be considered startups in and of themselves. And their goal is to reach either a niche local market or large global markets with a product or a service that supports their mission. They don't take investment, so nonprofits, you won't find investors investing in nonprofits. And they usually don't generate a large profit for the founders because that's not the priority. The priority is serving the mission. And so any profits that are made by the nonprofit are reinvested and go back to serving the mission of the nonprofit itself. But regardless of the type, a startup venture typically works independently to commercialize their product or their innovation. The second pathway to market and to scale is through partnership. So a startup or an inventor might share their research knowledge or their IP in exchange for access to a partner's manufacturing or distribution capabilities. Partners share the risk of commercializing, but they also share the reward as well. So this can be a really attractive option for innovators who are addressing a market outside of their home country, because an in-country or a global partner will often have a deeper understanding of the market, of the local infrastructure to deliver that product or that service. And then the third pathway option is licensing. So licensing to a partner or to a licensee usually allows you to reach the partner's customers more quickly than if you'd done it on your own. This pathway is often used when manufacturing or distribution logistics to reach a large market are significant. There's a significant hurdle there. So in a licensing agreement, the founder gives the rights to sell in a specified area or to specific market or end user, and then receives a share of the licensor's profits from those sales. And that payment is called a royalty. So there's much less of the inventor or the founder running a business, going out and reaching the customers, that you're just receiving revenue through the licensing royalty. Next slide, please. Awesome. All right. So, another way to look at the journey of getting an idea out of the lab and into the market is this really busy slide right here. So I'll quickly walk through it. So at the earliest stages, you've probably identified a societal challenge or a potential problem that you want to solve. And maybe you've started to identify a potential solution that is informed by stakeholder needs. As you move forward, as you begin to explore if there's a market for your innovation, you start identifying customers and users, you start articulating your value proposition, and then you start to develop a business model for how you're going to actually get that innovation out of your hands and into the hands of the customer or users in a financially sustainable way that will allow you to continue delivering that innovation and to continue delivering that impact. Then once you're at that point of a financially sustainable venture, you ultimately start to develop a strategy for how to scale that business in order to achieve that ultimate social or environmental impact. So it's at that stage 2, moving into stage 3 here in this framework, that you begin to implement that pathway to scale. But it's never too early to begin thinking about and planning for which pathway you think you will take, whether it's, developing your own startup, or partnering or licensing your innovation. Next slide, please. Cool. So how do you really move an innovation from idea to impact? In the next slide, we'll dive a little bit deeper into how do you actually do that? What does that look like? Next slide, please. So the customer development framework was developed by Steve Blank, and it's a helpful way of thinking about how you're moving that innovation from an idea to full creation to ultimately impact. And at the start, there's this, this initial search phase where you're seeking to understand, and then there's an execution phase where you are a financially sustainable venture operating at scale. There's a whole lot that has to happen in the middle, but since most of you are probably at that earlier side of things, we're going to spend more time focusing there. So in the earliest stages of the search phase, you're doing what's called customer discovery. You're seeking to understand the problem that your customers and your users have, and then trying to understand if your innovation is the right one to solve that problem. So during this stage of the process, you're seeking to understand the why. So going back to that what, how, why framework, you're seeking to understand the root cause, the why somebody has the problem that they do. And you will use that question hundreds, maybe even thousands of times to try and understand the root cause of the problem that your customer has. It's an iterative process where you learn, you gather evidence by talking to your customers, by talking to your users, by talking to other stakeholders, and by asking them that question of why. Always following up with the question of why, you'll eventually gather enough evidence from those stakeholders where you can pivot and refine your innovation, you can pivot and refine your business model, and come to ultimately having that impact at scale that you're seeking to have. This is a fairly lean approach to building a business. Next slide, please. So the old way, the kind of traditional venture development strategy, was that you would research the opportunity, you would write a business plan, you would go out and get resources to execute, you'd make your product, you'd sell your product, you'd have your impact. And then hopefully you continue to repeat that. As you keep going, you keep scaling. That's the traditional way. It assumes that you don't make a mistake along the way. So if you do make a mistake in this traditional kind of linear path, you have to go back to the very beginning with the new idea. After you've invested all of the funding, all of the time into making that product and developing that business plan. So that's not ideal. That's a ton of wasted time, a ton of wasted resources, especially for those of you that are making innovations that are, expensive and costly and have a pretty significant time and resource, investment needed to get that product out there. So, you might be developing an innovation that has, physical components or require a lot of time and testing, or regulatory approval. And you're also probably entering a really complex market. So you're not just, putting this online and hopefully people, having people buy it. You need to understand some pretty complex customers in order to realize your impact. So this old traditional way doesn't really work, of trying to get from idea all the way to impact, without having any kind of validation along the way. So next slide. So what we're hoping, you'll take with you is this idea of a lean strategy to developing your social innovation and your social impact. And this lean approach is one of researching and drafting the business model, getting evidence that the model will work from the market by talking to customers, by talking to end users. And then based on what you're learning at each of those points, being able to pivot earlier on, shift your strategies earlier on, before you go and invest all of that money up front to ultimately find out that you're not going to make it to A. This lean approach is really all about trying to treat building a business like a science experiment. You have your research question, you go out and you get evidence to validate those hypotheses through customer discovery, to see if your business model will work. And if not, changing and pivoting. So at each of those decision points, using market feedback to help direct you to the place of ultimately having impact. So next slide, please. So this process often feels really uncomfortable when you're doing it, when you're in the midst of the lean startup approach. You have high points, like when you hit key technology milestones, or when you get a ton of interest from users. You also probably have some low points as well, like when you have to make a pivot and go down a different path than you'd expected, or when a hypothesis that you thought was going to be right ends up to not be right. It's not always going to feel super great. It's probably going to look and feel a little bit like a roller coaster ride. But over the course of it, there's going to be a net increase overall, right? Like you're going to be moving from idea to impact along that roller coaster journey. Hopefully moving in the right direction and saving yourself from building things, that maybe nobody wants or is interested in, and saving yourself from investing a ton of time and money to ultimately not reach the place that you were hoping to reach. So next slide, please. So this is a funny little cartoon. It's from a book that I love called Talking to Humans, which is all about doing customer discovery, all about going out and talking to your stakeholders so that you are getting that validation from the market that you're on the right path. It's all about validating or invalidating your hypotheses about your business model. So one of the comics in that book is this kind of classic scientist joke, where this person over here is saying, "Did you talk to any customers?" And then the person responding is like, "What? Like talk to customers? What do they have to do with the product that we eventually want them to buy?" Right. So like really what it's about is translating that science to helping solve the customer's problem. A really common example, I think, that you're all familiar with is the cell phone. Right. So I don't necessarily know how the lithium ion battery in my phone here works, or how any of the software on it is working, or how updates to the firmware are made. But I know that my phone solves a problem for me. It makes me able to stay connected to my friends and family across the world 24/7. Whether I like being connected 24/7 or not is another story. But it solves that problem for me, and it's a problem I'm willing to pay for. So regardless of new innovations in technology, which certainly there are people who care about having the latest iPhone or the latest update. There are certainly people who really care about the technical features. But for the vast majority of people, the cell phone is not about the hardware, the software, but it's about the problem that it solves for them. And that is the key component of a value proposition. That's the why. That's why I have a phone. That's why your social impact innovation is impactful. So next slide, please. So this is another cartoon from Talking to Humans. It's a guy saying, I've been told I need to get candid, unbiased feedback on my startup idea. And his parents, who are inherently biased because they are his parents, are saying that they love the idea and they're so proud of him. So this cartoon is a silly reminder that in order to understand your customers and their problem, you can't talk to just anybody. You need to be talking to the right people. So it's probably not your parents or your friends or your peers or your faculty members. But really identifying the right people that you need to talk to, talking to the people who have the problem that you're aiming to solve, so that you understand the problem that they are facing firsthand. That really what that means is you probably have to go out and talk to people you don't know. So getting comfortable with talking to strangers and getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. So for example, if you're developing a medical app that can read lips and translate speech to real time for voiceless individuals, you probably need to go out and talk to clinicians and healthcare providers and voiceless individuals to understand the pain points that they're facing in trying to communicate with each other in a clinical setting, so that you can develop the right solution to help them solve those problems. So next slide. So to wrap up, hopefully you've gotten a bit of a sense of different pathways to help you get from an idea to impact, and then how to go about, kind of that messy middle, how to go about getting from idea to impact. So to wrap, I would love to leave you with a few resources. The recording and the slide deck will be available afterwards. But the first is a short video series that VentureWell produced in collaboration with Autodesk. That's all about thinking like an entrepreneur and diving a little bit deeper into what different pathways to scale could look like for you. The second is a video series from Udacity on how to build a startup. And the final one is the book I talked about that has the silly cartoons in it, called Talking to Humans, which you can download as a free PDF. I think it's like an 80-page PDF, and it's a really quick read. I highly recommend it to any and everybody. So hopefully all of that gave you a bit of understanding of what your potential pathways to scale look like. And you can start thinking through and incorporating that into your application for the Forward for Good challenge. I guess with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that folks might have.
And if there are any questions, feel free to either use the raise hand function or turn on your video, or put the question into the chat if you feel more comfortable.
Yeah,
All right.
Charles.
So hi everybody. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask. Before I ask, is it okay if I ask like on a general basis, not based on the Forward for Good application?
Sure. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you. So like I said earlier, I'm Charles from Kenya, Nairobi. my question was, whenever you're coming up with these solutions or these ideas that you want to impact, but then, like we saw earlier, you want to go the non-profit route, how do you pitch that idea to investors who maybe are looking into investing for financial benefits or financial gains?
Yeah, that's a great question that we could probably spend hours unpacking. But I'd say, there's a whole process, like I just talked about, with customer discovery and understanding your customers by talking to them. There's a whole other, parallel process around funder discovery. So, funders come in all shapes and sizes. Investors are one. And investors can't invest in nonprofits, with legal, ramifications. Investors can only invest in for-profit entities. So if you're considering a nonprofit route, your funding resources that are available to you are through grants and revenue, right? So revenue is the ultimate funding for any startup, regardless of if you're a for-profit or if you're a nonprofit. So selling your product, selling your innovation is going to have money coming in the door that you can reinvest in your business and reinvest in the work that you're doing. But I'd say, grant opportunities, funders who are either, philanthropic or, federal or state-based funders. There are always a bunch of agencies, both globally and probably local to Kenya, who are funding innovators on kind of a grant basis that if you're a nonprofit would be a good avenue to pursue.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Any other questions? All right.
Thank you all. Thank you all, and happy to follow up with any further questions if anybody has them via email. I'll drop my email in the chat.
I have a question, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So you were talking about how you should test your idea first before investing and getting investors on board. But like even to test the idea, you need some funding, right? So like what are some source of funding like a for-profit business could like reach out to? And at which stage do you think it's good to start having investors invest in the company?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Because I think that absolutely is true that different funders, and I'm going to use the word funders rather than investors, because investors are a very specific type of funder. But funders, different funders come in at different stages. So I think, this Forward for Good challenge is a great example of early stage funding that's available to students or startups that are, have an idea, but don't necessarily have a fully fleshed out prototype or haven't tested their prototype. So that, as a student, I think what you said you are when you introduced yourself in the chat, looking on campus for opportunities. A lot of times universities will have early stage grant funding opportunities for student innovators. And then as you grow, those funding opportunities continue to grow with you. So I'd say, what people typically think of as investors, like an angel investor or a venture capital investor, those kind of funders they typically come in fairly later stage, so that you do need capital, you need resources earlier on than they are willing to fund. And so grants are oftentimes, grants, stipends, fellowships, those kind of things, either through your institution or the state, or even at the federal level through like the National Science Foundation or National Institute of Health. are great options for the earlier stage funding side of things.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm also just going to put a link into the chat for if you're interested in applying to the Verizon Forward for Good Challenge. Feel free to just go to this link here and that will get you started. Do we have any other questions?
How is the Rise for Good Challenge related to the CGI Global Youth Initiative?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So CGIU is sort of our core social innovation and social impact program. And the Verizon Forward for Good Challenge is another program that we offer at CGIU in partnership with VentureWell, so the organization Kara is from, and also with Verizon. And the key difference really is that, for the Verizon Challenge, we're looking for social impact projects that really use leading edge technology to advance your solution and to create impact.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. And actually, I can put another link in the chat there just for our general page about CGIU and the different programs that we offer, because that will also provide more distinctions between the two different programs if you're interested. All right, anything else? Okay, well, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to Kara for providing that really insightful session on various innovation pathways. And we look forward to seeing any of you apply to either of these programs, and feel free to be in touch if you have any additional questions. Thanks, everyone.
Excuse me, I have a question. Is it possible to have your email address to reach out to you for like more following ups if possible?
Sure, yes, I can put mine in the chat. There we go. There's mine.
All right, let me copy that. Thank you so much.
Perfect. All right. Have a good one, everyone.